So, evening, everyone. So, continuing on the theme of Chanukah, slightly different angle this evening. So, one of the things you see just how much the world has changed, also changed for the better, changed in other ways as well. But we've been speaking about, for example, the Shata Sakana, right? That originally the Chanukah candles were lit outside, afterwards they had to be moved inside because there was a Gzera, Shata Sakana. You weren't allowed to light your candles in public. I think today, there's no self-respecting Western leader who doesn't have a Chanukah message, have a Chanukah party, or something. And it was actually very interesting. Last year, so number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister of Britain, every year releases a video for Chanukah. So again, why Chanukah and other days, I don't know. But so he ended off the message last year in the following way, following sentence. He said, he gave his message to whatever it was, and he said, Chanukah, we can summarize, like many Jewish festivals, they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. I kid you not, this was the Prime Minister of Britain at the time. What happened to you? You're right. The question is, right, the question I want to ask is he correct? Did he get it wrong? They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. Who says that let's eat actually applies to Chanukah? Who says that you have a mitzvah to eat on Chanukah? Certainly, you aren't allowed to fast. Certainly, we do eat, right? Everybody wants to, but the question is there a mitzvah? Is there a chiyuv? Where does that come from? Could have halachic ramifications as well. The truth is, the Shulchan Aruch on this, very, very strange language. We find the first siman, Shulchan Aruch talks about Ilchot Chanukah. He says the following. He says, Ribui ha'su'udot shemalbim b'hem. So the extra meals that you have on Chanukah. So before telling us you should, you shouldn't, this is a fact. This is a fait accompli. People are going to eat more on Chanukah. They're having all these su'udot. He says, Ribui ha'su'udot malbim b'hem, hem su'udat al-reshut. Okay. Don't blame Chanukah for your meals. These are su'udat reshut that you're eating. Shelo kva'um lemishteh v'simcha. These were not days which were established for mishteh and simcha. That language is familiar to us from the other rabbinic festival, which is Purim. Which Purim is Yomei mishteh v'simcha, as it says in the Megillah. So, is there an element of simcha? Is there an element of achila, of chiyuv su'udah on Chanukah or not? So, the first thing which many of the poskim point to is the difference between, we know other festivals where we do have a chiyuv achila and a chiyuv simcha and mishteh, notably Purim, right? What's the difference between Purim and Chanukah? That on Purim, when they came for our guf, they tried to destroy us physically. They wanted to get la'rog, la'abed, la'shmid. Whereas on Chanukah, at least initially, the beginning of the story, it wasn't a battle against the guf, it was a battle against the neshama. They went to, and we say this difference is reflected in our tefillot, the alanissim. You look at the alanissim we say on Purim, you look at the alanissim we say on Chanukah, we don't say they tried to kill us, we say lashkicham toratecha u'laviram mechukei rotzonecha. They tried to make us forget the Torah. They tried to make us stop fulfilling their mitzvot. Ultimately, it turned into a physical battle as well. But originally, if the Jewish people had just given up Torah and just stopped being who we are, converted, chas v'shalom, they would have left us alone, supposedly. So that's the difference between Purim and Chanukah. It's reflected in a number of different ways. And the Taz brings us, he quotes the way he understands the Levush. He says the difference between Purim and Chanukah, he says that on Purim there was Hatzalat Nefashot, and Chanukah was not Hatzalat Nefashot. It was about saving the souls. Again, ultimately became that. But the Taz seems to understand that there's maybe a greater salvation that took place on Purim than took place on Chanukah, and therefore, Chanukah, there's no Chiyuv Suda. Taz himself questions that. He says, wait a minute. He says, we know, in Halakha, we have a principle, that somebody who's gadol machti et adam me'argo. In certain respects, in certain aspects, you cause somebody to sin that is worse in certain ways than killing them, because the person who kills them is removing them from this world. The person who makes them sin is removing them from the world to come. So the Taz rejects that understanding, and he says the difference is very, very simply that on Purim it was a physical battle, physical salvation. Therefore, we respond, we celebrate by doing physical things, by eating. Chanukah was something spiritual, and therefore we respond spiritually. We fulfill the mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles, etc. So you ask the question, why can't we do both, right? Why can't we do both? But the Taz seems to understand that no, we don't do both, and we just do. It's only for a physical salvation that would be metaken a suda. celebrate in that way. The question we can ask on this Taz is: we have examples. We know places in Torah and Halakha where we have a Suda and we have Mishter and we celebrate physically for something spiritual which occurred. Best example of this, thinking about Yamim Tovim, is you think about Shavuot. So the Gemara Pesachim says that all there's Machloket, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, that all the different Yamim Tovim, right, a person can decide if they want to be, there's Machlok, where can it be? Chetzio Lachem v'Chetzio Lashem, which is the way we paskan, or can you say Kulo Lashem, Kulo Lachem, which essentially means that come to Yom Tov, if a person wanted to, Rabbi Eliezer, a person doesn't want to sit and waste time eating and having sudot, want to just sit and learn the whole day, that's okay. That's up to you. That's Kulo Lashem. With one exception, again, we don't paskan that way, but there's one exception to that. The Gemara says when it comes to Shavuot, Batzeret, everybody agrees that you need also Lachem. Everybody agrees that on Shavuot you have to have, not that you have to learn Torah, which is minhag, but everybody agrees that you have to have a Suda. You have to sit down, you have to eat. Why? This is the day we receive the Torah. So we receive the Torah. This is certainly a spiritual matter. We respond by having a meal. We respond by having a Suda. Also, in the same siman over here with the when the Shulchan Aruch tells us about this Ribui Sudot. So there are Maarites that in fact yesh omrim yesh k'tzat mitzvah b'ribui Sudot. Shulchan Aruch said there's no mitzvah. Certainly there's no chovah, there's no obligation. The Ramah says there is a bit of a mitzvah with these meals. Why? Mishum de beotan hayamim haya Chanukat HaMizbeach. That we had the Chanukat HaMizbeach, Chanukat HaMizbeach, the inauguration of the altar in the Beit HaMikdash, and that is certainly something spiritual as well. And that would seem to be, the Taz doesn't argue over here, that would seem to be a reason to have a Suda. So seems a little bit strange. Okay, what happened was a physical salvation, but nonetheless, the way that we respond, the Rambam writes that the days of Hanukkah are days of Yomei Simcha v'Halal. He calls them days of happiness and praise. And Simcha, generally speaking, refers to Surah as well. The Shulchan Aruch over here, he says these are not days of Mishta and Simcha. It's the question: what is the Simcha? What does it come with? If the Simcha can come with Mishta, or the Simcha can come with Halal. What's it about? But that seems to be the basic distinction, at least, so that there shouldn't be a chovah. There shouldn't be an obligation to have the Sudat mitzvah. There is Mishnat Yavetz of Zolti, Rav Yerushalayim, goes so far to say, in fact, it was intentional. He says the reason why Chazal were not metaken that there should be a Suda on Chanukah was in order that to make it different to the other Yamim Tovim. There's a question regarding Purim and regarding Chanukah. Chachamim are coming along and adding in another Yom Tov, which we don't have. What about Baal Tosef? What about adding something on? So again, different ways of addressing that discussion. The Gemara itself addresses it regarding Purim. But Rav Zolti says part of the reason why there's no Suda, there's no Chovat Suda, so that it is distinctly different from the Yamim Tovim of the Torah. There should be no chashash of Baal Tosef in that sense. Okay, but anyways, as I mentioned, the Rambam says Yemei Simcha v'Hala. What everybody agrees, even if there's no obligation to eat, there is an obligation to eat, not to have a Suda, because it's asur to fast. Everybody agrees that you cannot have a ta'anit on Chanukah. In fact, the way the Gemara, the Braita opens up, it tells us what is Chanukah. It says, my Chanukah tells us that we have these 8 days on which you cannot give a hesped, and which you cannot have a ta'anit. This is probably related to the fact as well that both Chanukah and Purim are Chagim, the only remnants that we still have from Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit were certain days of quasi Yom Tov, I guess you could say. There's no Isur Malacha, but certain days of celebration, which we had in the days of the Beit HaMikdash, all related to different events which took place, different forms of salvation and different celebratory events took place during the days of the Beit HaMikdash. What defines these days, halachically, is that you can't have a hesped and that you can't have time, that you can't fast on them. So I say the only 2 that we have left are Purim and Chanukah. The Gemara has a whole discussion. Does Megillat Ta'anit still apply nowadays or not? At the end of the day, Purim and Chanukah are different. These are the days we still keep because there was Pirsum Manes, because there was a mitzvah, because there was a bit of a difference. So everybody agrees that that you can't fast. Question is, okay, there's no obligation, there's no chovah to have these sudah. But if you have the sudah, is it a mitzvah or does it become a mitzvah? Right? And there's 2 different ways that we can look at the concept of a sudat mitzvah, what it means conceptually. There are sudot mitzvah. There are occasions where there is an obligation, where you have to eat. So we spoke about Purim, we spoke about Yom Tov. You think of a Brit Milah. where there is a Seudat mitzvah, meaning you have to eat and celebrate in this way, then clearly Hanukkah is not going to fall into that category. It's explained. But then there are other days whereby, other occasions where you could have a Seudat mitzvah, where there's not necessarily an obligation. But if you have the Seudat, it becomes a mitzvah. It has halachic criteria as well. So for example, somebody does a Siyum Masechet, somebody finishes, makes a Siyum. You don't have to have a Seudat, but if you have a Seudat, certainly a Seudat mitzvah. And what's the proof? If it's Erev Pesach, Tanit HaBechorot, don't have to fast. If it's during the 9 days, again, it's actually a Seudat, and that's the time. I'm not getting into the discussion now whether we should be, what counts or what doesn't count, but so that mitzvah, and you could eat meat, even though there's no obligation. So by Chanukah, it could be the same thing as well. And this is what the Ramah tells us. He says, Yesh k'tzat mitzvah, there's a little bit of a mitzvah, but what he adds in order to really transform this and make a bona fide Seudat mitzvah, he says, Noagin lo maz milot v'tishbachot b'seudot shemalbim b'hem v'az havei Seudat mitzvah. Right, so Chanukah gives us a little bit, but in addition, if these are used as you sing songs of praise and you praise Hashem at these meals, then that's not just Simchat Kreso, as the Rambam says in a different context, but that is the real Simcha. That becomes a Seudat mitzvah. And maybe that's the fulfillment. When the Rambam was talking about Yemei Halal v'Simcha, if you have the Halal together as part of the meal, as part of the Simcha, then it becomes a Seudat mitzvah. So it's not enough just to go and have a little bit more food than you normally would on Hanukkah, but if it's turning the meal into something spiritual, to elevating it into something greater, right? You don't need Hanukkah to sit around and watch the football and have something to eat while you're doing it. That doesn't make it a Seudat mitzvah. But if it includes Divrei Torah, it includes, and ultimately the question is, how are we channeling the entire Seudat, the entire event? That's what turns it into the Seudat mitzvah. There's a very interesting biur halacha over here. Where he says on this Ramah, he says, Noagin lo zmiot v'tishbachot. He says the following. He says, quotes the Maharshal, who says as well, it says that if you have the Simcha of Chanukah has to be together with Simchat Torah, not the date Simchat Torah, but meaning together with the Simcha of learning Torah. He says, Al tevatel mikviotcha, don't stop learning because of this. And then he says, Ba'avonateinu harabim. Now, great sins. Yesh anashim, listen to the avonot over here. Yesh anashim shetachat zmirot v'tishpachot she'ho'il la'ala Hashem yitbarach al hanisim she'asa lanu. Instead of singing songs of praise and thanking Hashem and giving halal for the miracles which He's done for us, what do people do? Marbim b'schok hakaltim. They play cards. Okay, and this translation of Yam, Mitzrak Lafim. Now, I'm not sure, again, if the cards in the days of the Biur Halacha are like cards that we have nowadays, or this is something more sinister. We know that the cards have their roots in all sorts of things to do with Avodah Zarah and magic and things like that. So I'm not sure what he's referring to. But he says, B'schok HaKaltim, he says, Habeh hil ishu asforim HaKadoshim al zeh. The Sforim Kadoshim made a great noise about this. We were very, very unhappy about this. Vashomer nafsho yilchak mizeh. This is something that you should not come close to. But what we can take from it, again, the point is, these are not just meant to be days of idleness, of nothing, frivolity, but the seudot, you're already having these extra seudot, these extra meals on Hanukkah. Turn them into something, it's L'Shem Shamayim. Turn them into something that makes it part of the Yemei Halal v'Simcha as well. רבי חנניה בן עקשיא אומר, אצל הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות את ישראל, לפיכך בא להם תורה מצוות, שנאמר אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיר